They never notice when you're there, only when you're gone. That's the painful truth about avoidant individuals. Presence rarely moves them, but absence does. You can explain, beg, reason, cry. It won't break through. But the silence that follows when you finally walk away, that silence echoes louder than any words ever could. Because walking away is the one thing that flips the entire dynamic they depend on. It removes their control, and for someone who survives on emotional control, that's an earthquake. Avoidance builds safety through distance. They regulate intimacy by keeping you one emotional step behind, always chasing connection but never quite reaching it. When you stay, you become part of their system, predictable, available, waiting. But when you leave, that system collapses. Suddenly, they aren't the ones managing distance. You are. And for the first time, they feel what they've spent their whole life avoiding: vulnerability. Walking away isn't revenge. It's not manipulation. It's clarity. It's the moment you stop trying to be chosen and start choosing yourself. And in doing that, you unconsciously do the one thing an avoidant never expects. You stop orbiting them. You pull your energy back, and the gravitational pull they relied on disappears. That absence creates a vacuum. They start thinking, wondering, obsessing. Because if there's one thing an avoidant can't stand, it's not knowing whether they still have emotional control. It's in that space of silence that realization begins. The avoidant might not run back immediately. They might even double down on their indifference. But internally, something cracks. Your absence confronts them with their own fear, the fear of losing what they took for granted. And that's when the awakening starts. Not because you punished them, but because you showed them what life looks like without your emotional labor sustaining their comfort. Walking away doesn't just wake an avoidant up. It teaches them something they can't learn any other way. That love without respect is hollow, and distance without consequence isn't freedom, it's loneliness. If you want to better understand how to deal with avoidance, then subscribe to the channel to know everything. Avoidants don't wake up through conversations, ultimatums, or emotional pleas. They wake up through absence, the one thing they thought they were comfortable with. You see, they've built their entire emotional structure around distance. It's how they survive connection. Distance is safety. Silence is control. Detachment is strength. At least, that's what they've always told themselves. But when you become the one who chooses distance, everything shifts. The story flips. The silence they once used to feel powerful now feels hollow. The calm they used to take pride in becomes suffocating. They start hearing echoes of the moments they dismissed, the tone of your voice when you were still trying, the softness they once saw as too much. They remember every time you gave them grace, and they didn't meet you halfway. They realized too late that the connection they treated as optional was the only place they ever felt understood. Walking away is disruptive because it exposes the illusion of control. Avoidants like to believe they can detach without consequences, that people will always stay, waiting in emotional standby, ready to reconnect when they feel safe again. But when you stop participating in that rhythm, you become the first person to mirror back the truth. Control isn't love, and love isn't endless patience. That's the paradox that wakes them up. The avoidant who thought they didn't need closeness now finds themselves haunted by it. They start checking your online status, rereading old messages, wondering if they were too cold, too slow, too unreachable. The very detachment that once protected them now feels like punishment. They start realizing, maybe for the first time, that safety without connection isn't safety at all. It's isolation dressed as independence. And that's the moment they start to feel. Not because you forced it, but because you withdrew your permission for them not to. At first, they tell themselves they're fine. They convince their mind that they never needed you, that losing you is simply peace returning. They double down on detachment, mistaking numbness for strength. But avoidance isn't true peace, it's emotional anesthesia. And when the dose wears off, what's left is longing. The kind they don't know how to name. Avoidants spend so much time controlling their emotional exposure that they forget feelings don't vanish just because they're suppressed. They linger quietly beneath the surface, waiting for stillness. And when you leave, stillness is all that's left. No more arguments, no more tension, no more emotional noise to hide behind. Just silence. And silence has a way of revealing what's real. That's when the longing creeps in, slowly at first. A thought here, a memory there, a scent, a sound, a phrase that reminds them of you. They catch themselves thinking about what you might be doing, who you might be talking to, whether you've moved on. They wonder why the peace they craved now feels like emptiness. It's because avoidance only works when there's someone left to avoid. Once you're gone, the mechanism breaks. They're left with what they've been running from all along, themselves. This longing isn't the kind that pushes them to chase immediately. It's quieter, more unsettling. It shows up in dreams, in late-night reflections, in small pangs of regret they try to rationalize away. They'll replay your last conversation, the way you didn't beg, the way you simply said, "I can't do this anymore." That composure, your self-respect, becomes the mirror they can't unsee. Because while you walked away, they stayed stuck in the very cage they built to feel safe. And that's the cruel irony. The freedom they fought for now feels like confinement. The control they prized now feels like loss. In the absence of your warmth, they start to understand something terrifying. Their version of love has always been distance, and distance never loved them back. It doesn't happen suddenly. It's subtle, the quiet unraveling of someone who's always believed they were immune to feeling too much. Avoidants spend years mastering emotional control. They know how to disappear, how to stay detached, how to talk about closeness without ever actually stepping into it. But everyone has a breaking point. And for them, it's the moment they realize control isn't protecting them anymore. It's isolating them. This is where the shift begins. They catch themselves checking their phone more often, even though they swore they wouldn't. They wonder why your name still lingers in their notifications list, why the memory of your laughter still interrupts their thoughts. Control starts to slip in the smallest ways, not in public breakdowns, but in quiet, private contradictions. They still try to act indifferent, but inside, the calm has cracked. The truth is, they built their identity on being the one who feels less. That's their safety. So when emotion begins to rise, the ache of missing you, the discomfort of regret, it's not just painful, it's disorienting. They don't know what to do with feelings they can't regulate through withdrawal. They try to distract themselves, work harder, date casually, bury the memory of you in noise, but nothing lands. Every attempt to numb only amplifies the absence. For the avoidant, losing control is not about anger or outbursts. It's about the sudden awareness that their walls have turned into mirrors. Everywhere they look, they see the reflection of what they ran from. The closeness they claimed they didn't need now feels like the one thing that could quiet the emptiness inside. But reaching out would mean vulnerability, admitting that the person they pushed away is the one who mattered most. And that's the torment. They're torn between two impossible truths. They want you, but they don't know how to have you without losing the safety they've spent their whole life protecting. That's when the internal storm begins, control breaks, and feeling finally floods in. Regret doesn't come to the avoidant as a sudden crash. It comes as a whisper, soft, inconvenient, but persistent. It speaks in moments they can't predict, during a quiet drive, in the middle of the night, or when they catch a glimpse of something that reminds them of you. It says, "You pushed away the one person who saw you." And for the first time, they can't silence it. Avoidants are used to being misunderstood, so they build a kind of pride around their solitude. They convince themselves that emotional distance is strength, that needing no one means they've won the battle against pain. But when you walked away, you didn't punish them. You simply stopped participating in the illusion. And that's when regret found its voice. They start remembering not just what happened, but what didn't. The conversations they avoided, the words they swallowed, the tenderness they never allowed themselves to show. It's not the loss of the relationship that hurts most. It's the realization of their own emotional absence within it. They remember your patience, your understanding, the way you tried to meet them halfway. And then they remember how they met that effort with walls. Regret, for an avoidant, is terrifying because it confronts the very identity they've built. To feel remorse means to acknowledge that they cared. And caring means they're not as detached as they've claimed to be. So they wrestle with it. They try to bury it under rationalizations. It wouldn't have worked anyway. They were too emotional. But every excuse fades against the memory of your calm strength. The way you loved without chasing, the way you left without bitterness. In the quiet of that realization, they start to feel something foreign, humility. The awareness that love was never the threat they thought it was. That maybe connection wasn't suffocation, but the very thing that could have set them free. But awareness isn't yet change. It's the first crack of light under a heavy door. And once regret starts to speak, the avoidant can no longer unhear it. They think about it more than they'll ever admit. That message they could send, that call they could make, the words they could finally say. I miss you. I was wrong. Can we talk? But for the avoidant, those three actions, reaching out, apologizing, reconnecting, feel like standing unarmed in a battlefield. Vulnerability has always equaled danger. And so they hesitate, trapped in the paralysis between wanting to be seen and fearing what that exposure might cost them. When you walked away, you didn't just leave a void. You left them with a choice. To stay hidden behind pride or to risk being human again. And that choice terrifies them. Because reaching out means surrendering the one thing they've always depended on, control. It means admitting that they feel something they can't rationalize away. It means you have emotional power they thought they'd never give anyone. So they linger in indecision. They might draft messages they never send, revisit old conversations, check your social media just to confirm you're still out there, living, healing, maybe smiling again. Every small sign of your life, without them, stirs something deeper. Jealousy, admiration, sadness. A cocktail of feelings they can't name without choking on their own denial. Inside, they argue with themselves. If they wanted me, they'd reach out. It's too late. They've moved on. But beneath those excuses lies a quieter truth. They don't trust themselves not to ruin it again. The self-awareness that regret gave them is now their own obstacle. They know that reaching out isn't enough unless they can stay. And staying means showing up emotionally, consistently, vulnerably. That's the very skill they've never learned. So they remain silent, half hoping you'll reopen the door for them. But you don't. And that silence teaches them what words never could. Love doesn't wait forever. Their fear of reaching out becomes its own form of punishment, knowing what they want, but lacking the courage to claim it. At first, they tell themselves solitude is peace. It's what they've always wanted: space, quiet, freedom. No emotional demands. No expectations. Just them and their thoughts. But over time, the silence changes texture. It stops feeling like calm and starts to feel like emptiness. That's the moment when an avoidant finally experiences true loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from realizing no one's reaching for them anymore. Avoidants spend most of their lives convincing themselves that independence means safety. They mistake isolation for emotional maturity. But what they don't realize, until everyone has stopped trying, is that emotional distance is not strength. It's self-abandonment disguised as control. When they pushed you away, they thought they were preserving themselves. In truth, they were dismantling the only bridge that ever led back to them. Now, they sit with the weight of that. No one texting to check in. No warmth waiting at the other end of a message. The world feels quieter, colder. And in that stillness, they begin to notice how much of their life has been about avoidance. Avoiding love, avoiding pain, avoiding the mirror of intimacy that might show them who they really are. But avoidance can't protect them from the ache that lives underneath it. That ache, the longing to be known, to be held, to be seen without judgment, finally surfaces. And there's nowhere left to run. They scroll through old photos, replay conversations, analyze their own behavior like a detective searching for clues in a mystery they created. They realize how much effort you gave, how much softness you offered. And for the first time, the distance they built no longer feels like safety. It feels like a wound that never healed. Because now, it's not that no one can reach them, it's that no one is even trying. And that's when loneliness stops being a condition and becomes a consequence. It's in that emptiness that self-awareness begins. They start to see that the walls they built for protection have become their prison. And though they won't say it yet, deep down they know. What they called peace was never peace at all. It was fear, dressed beautifully, carried quietly, but still fear. There comes a quiet moment, not dramatic, not cinematic, when the avoidant finally understands. Not intellectually, but viscerally. It's the moment the pattern becomes visible. The moment they realize every relationship has ended the same way. Them running, someone reaching, them retreating further, someone finally giving up. And suddenly, it hits them. They've never actually lost people because others were too much. They've lost them because they gave too little. This realization doesn't come from guilt alone. It comes from truth. The truth that avoidance was never strength. It was survival. It was a strategy learned long ago, from childhood wounds, from unmet needs, from the belief that love and pain always arrive together. But now, that strategy has stopped working. The life built on control has become unbearably small. The relationships they once managed from a distance now feel like ghosts they can't touch. They start replaying memories differently. They see moments they once dismissed as pressure and recognize them as love. They remember times you reached out not to control them, but to connect. And that awareness hurts in a new way, the kind of pain that isn't about loss, but about recognition. Because they finally understand that what you offered wasn't threat, it was safety. And they weren't running from you. They were running from what your love reflected back at them. The parts of themselves they never learned to hold with compassion. This realization becomes the seed of change. But change for the avoidant doesn't come with apologies and promises. It comes with stillness, with sitting in discomfort, with seeing that walking away didn't just wake them up, it forced them to grow. Because for the first time, they can't hide behind their usual logic. You're gone, and no amount of self-control can bring you back. In that moment of clarity, they see it clearly. You didn't leave to hurt them. You left because you refused to abandon yourself. And that's when they realize what real love looks like. It's not staying to prove your worth. It's walking away when someone refuses to meet you halfway. Healing for the avoidant doesn't start with a grand declaration or a tearful reunion. It starts with quiet accountability. The moment they stop blaming everyone else and begin to look inward, they start seeing patterns where they once saw coincidences. Every withdrawal, every silence, every time they mistook love for intrusion, it all begins to make sense. They begin to understand that their defenses weren't protecting their heart, they were imprisoning it. Avoidants have always believed that self-reliance was power, that needing no one meant freedom. But when everyone has stopped reaching, freedom starts to feel like exile. And that's when something shifts, not out of desperation, but out of exhaustion. They grow tired of their own emotional distance, tired of pretending they don't care, tired of calling loneliness peace. The healing begins there, in the decision to stop running. It's not an easy process. Healing for the avoidant feels like learning a new language after years of silence. They struggle to express softness, to stay present when emotions rise, to listen without retreating into their mind. But little by little, they start to notice progress. A text they actually respond to instead of ignoring. A conversation they stay in even when it feels uncomfortable. A moment where they choose connection over control. Each small act becomes a rebellion against the version of themselves that believed closeness was danger. They also begin to understand what you were trying to teach them, not through lectures or pleading, but through your boundaries. Your walking away was not rejection. It was revelation. It showed them what emotional maturity looks like, loving someone without losing yourself. That memory becomes their quiet compass, not to chase you, but to evolve. And though they may never say it out loud, a part of them will always be grateful to you. Because your absence did what your presence never could. It forced them to face the one truth they'd spent their life avoiding. That real intimacy isn't about control. It's about being seen and staying anyway. It happens slowly, not in one revelation, but through countless small recognitions that begin to soften what once felt unbreakable. One day, they notice that they no longer flinch when someone tries to get close. Another day, they find themselves listening, really listening, without waiting for the moment to retreat. They begin to understand that love was never the threat. It was the teacher. And all along, what they were truly afraid of wasn't intimacy itself, but the parts of themselves that intimacy would reveal. When an avoidant finally understands love, they see it not as something that takes, but something that allows. Love isn't about control or distance. It's about space and safety coexisting. It's the realization that two people can be deeply connected without losing individuality, that vulnerability doesn't mean collapse, and that being seen doesn't mean being swallowed. Love, real love, becomes the first place they no longer need to hide. They think back to you, not with regret alone, but with gratitude. You were the catalyst, the mirror that showed them both the beauty and the cost of their emotional defenses. By walking away, you didn't abandon them. You liberated them from the illusion that love must be feared. And even if they never find the words to tell you, a quiet part of them carries the lesson you left behind, that the person who loves you doesn't need to chase you. They need to meet you. Healing doesn't rewrite the past, it redefines it. For the avoidant, understanding love means finally realizing that connection and independence were never enemies. They were always meant to coexist. And though they may still stumble, they no longer run from what's real. They begin to choose presence over protection, truth over control, and love, not as escape, but as home. So if you've ever walked away from someone avoidant, remember this: your leaving wasn't the end of the story. It was the awakening. And sometimes, the most powerful act of love isn't staying to fix someone. It's leaving so they can finally learn how to face themselves. If this message resonated with you, subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and repost this video, because someone out there needs to understand that walking away isn't cruelty. It's clarity.